The storm had rolled in fast. Wind howled down the streets of Brooklyn, rattling windows and shaking old lampposts as rain fell like sheets from the heavens. Juliet Hayes wiped her foggy glasses with the edge of her cardigan and leaned against the counter of her shop. Hayes and Page's, a cozy little bookshop lit by warm amber lamps and the comforting scent of cinnamon tea. She should have closed an hour ago. But something in the air, maybe the loneliness of the rain or the weight of the day, made her linger. Her cat, Ezra, was curled up beside the small heater, snoring gently. She turned the final page of her book, sighed softly, and reached to switch off the open sign when the bell above the door jingled. A man stepped in, soaked to the bone, tall, dark coat clinging to his broad frame. He had a cut on his cheek, barely visible under a day's worth of stubble, and his eyes ice blue met hers with quiet desperation. "I'm sorry," he said hoarsely. "I didn't mean to startle you. I just needed somewhere to breathe." Juliet blinked, slowly lowering her hand from the light switch. "You're bleeding," she said gently. "It's nothing. You're dripping all over my first editions." He gave a ghost of a smile. "I'll buy the shop." She stared. "I'm kidding," he added quickly, raking a hand through his wet hair. "Sorry, bad habit. Look, I'll leave. I didn't mean to bother you." But something in his voice stopped her. A tremble, not from cold, but something deeper. "Fear? Pain? Wait," she said, stepping around the counter. "Sit. You're not leaving in this weather. I'll get you a towel and tea." He hesitated, as if unused to kindness, then finally nodded. She disappeared into the back room, heart racing. Who was this man? When she returned, he was seated by the fireplace, staring at the bookshelves like they held answers to a question he was afraid to ask. He looked so out of place here, like a painting hung in the wrong gallery, but no less mesmerizing. "I'm Juliet," she said, offering him a towel. He took it silently, his fingers brushing hers, calloused, strong, yet trembling. "Nathaniel," he said, and with that name, something stirred in her memory. Nathaniel Cross, the billionaire who disappeared after the merger scandal. Whispers of betrayal, a broken engagement, a ruined company, lawsuits, lies, money lost. But the man in front of her didn't look like a headline. He looked lost. The storm drummed its rhythm against the windows, a lullaby of thunder and rain that wrapped the small bookshop in a cocoon of stillness. The fireplace crackled softly as the scent of chamomile filled the air. Juliet handed Nathaniel a steaming cup of tea in silence, unsure of what to say or ask. He took it with both hands, as though afraid to drop it. There was a sharp contrast between his appearance and his body language. This was a man who had once commanded boardrooms and controlled empires, yet now sat hunched over, shrinking into a worn armchair like a boy who'd been caught in the rain of his own undoing. Juliet sat across from him, curled on the armrest of the couch, her legs tucked beneath her, watching him over the rim of her mug. Ezra, her gray tabby, lifted his head from the heater, gave Nathaniel a disinterested glance, then yawned and returned to his nap. "I like your cat," Nathaniel finally said, his voice still hoarse. "He hates everyone," Juliet replied dryly. "So consider that a compliment." He chuckled lightly, the sound surprisingly soft. "I'll take it." A beat passed. Juliet cleared her throat. "So, rough night?" Nathaniel looked up, and for a moment, something flickered behind his eyes. Not just pain, grief. Then he smoothed it over with practiced ease. "You could say that." She raised a brow, waiting. He offered nothing more. "I'm not asking for your whole story," she said gently, "but you do look like you were mugged by the storm and then slapped by life." That earned her a real smile, tired, crooked, but real. "That's almost poetic." "I read a lot," she said, sipping. "Words tend to stick." He looked around the shop, then at the mismatched chairs, the string lights over the romance section, the hand-painted local authors sign on the wall. "This place feels like a memory." Juliet tilted her head. "Is that a good thing?" He nodded. Yeah, I think so." Another pause. The silence wasn't uncomfortable though. It was filled with unsaid things, shared in the kind of space where just strangers could breathe. Then he asked quietly, "Why are you still open this late?" Juliet shrugged, setting her tea down. "Couldn't sleep. It's been one of those weeks." "Heartbreak?" She blinked. "Not lately." He looked down at his tea. "Lucky you." Juliet studied him for a moment. There was something hollow in him. Not the kind of hollow that came from being empty, but the kind that came from having once been full and then losing it all. The kind you couldn't fix with money. "You want to talk about it?" she asked softly. He hesitated. No, then after a breath, but thank you. She nodded, not pushing. You can stay till the rain stops. I'll leave no trace. Juliet smiled faintly. You already left water puddles and emotional tension. He laughed again, short, but lighter than before. She stood and grabbed a folded quilt from the corner. The couch pulls out. You can sleep here. I'll be upstairs. He watched her, brow furrowing. Why are you being kind to me? Juliet paused, then answered honestly, because you look like you forgot what kindness feels like. His jaw tightened, but he didn't reply. She started up the stairs but paused at the turn. Oh, and Nathaniel? He looked up. If you decide to rob me in the middle of the night, just know my cat has claws, and I alphabetize by author so I'll know if a book is missing. Nathaniel smiled, really smiled this time. Duly noted, and with that, Juliet disappeared upstairs, leaving him alone with the fire, the tea, and the quiet realization that for the first time in a very long time, he felt safe, even if only for tonight. The rain was still falling when Juliet woke the next morning. Though softer now, like the storm was apologizing for last night's drama, she lay still for a few seconds, listening. No sound from downstairs. Had he left? She sat up in bed, brushing her tangled curls from her face. The old floor creaked beneath her as she tiptoed down the narrow wooden staircase that led from her apartment above the bookshop to the main floor. The couch was empty, folded, tidy. The blanket she'd left was carefully draped over the armrest, but he hadn't left. He was standing in the nonfiction section, dressed now in a dry white shirt she vaguely remembered keeping for donation, and dark jeans, still damp from the storm. His back was to her, tall and still. In one hand, he held a book, not just any book. Tech Empires, How Nathaniel Cross Reshaped Silicon Valley. Juliet froze. Her heart stuttered. She had seen that name before. She remembered now the headlines, the scandal, the fall from grace. But it hadn't clicked last night. Maybe because he was soaked. Maybe because the man in those articles had looked cold and untouchable. But the man in her shop looked wounded. Still, there was no denying it now. Nathaniel Cross, billionaire, former CEO of Grayline Systems, once named Forbes' youngest tech visionary, engaged to heiress Camille Lane, disappeared after accusations of insider trading and betrayal during a billion-dollar merger that left thousands unemployed. A storm indeed. Juliet stood at the base of the stairs, her breath caught somewhere between her chest and throat. She felt like the bookshop walls were tilting. He turned slightly, sensing her presence. Their eyes met. You're awake, he said, gently placing the book back on the shelf. You're still here, she replied, more breath than voice. He nodded once, watching her carefully. I thought I'd wait for the rain to ease. Hope that's all right. Juliet swallowed. Her mind was whirling. What was he doing here? Why her bookshop? Why now? And why did her heart ache for someone she had just met? You found that book, she said, nodding toward the shelf. Her voice was flat, her body rigid. I did, he replied, not flinching. I figured you knew. I didn't. Silence stretched between them. The sound of dripping gutters outside filled the quiet. Juliet folded her arms across her chest. So which part of the story is true? Nathaniel looked down at the floor for a moment, then back at her. All of it, he said quietly, and none of it. That clears it up, she snapped. I'm not here to hide, Juliet, he said, stepping closer. I didn't come in last night thinking you'd give me a free pass or sanctuary. I was running from the rain, that's all. But I stayed. Because, he hesitated, because this place felt honest. Juliet blinked. The edge of her anger dulled. Honest? He nodded. It didn't ask anything of me. She lowered her gaze. Well, now it is. Another pause. Juliet let out a slow breath, willing her hands to stop shaking. I don't know what kind of mess you're in, and honestly, I don't want to be dragged into anything. I run a quiet life here. I sell books and make tea and try not to get hurt. Nathaniel's face was unreadable, but his voice was raw. I'm not asking you to be part of it. I just needed one night to feel like I wasn't being hunted or judged. Juliet looked at him again. There was something behind those glacier blue eyes, not arrogance, not manipulation, but shame and exhaustion, and something else, loneliness. I don't trust people who keep secrets, she said carefully. I don't trust people who expose them, he said just as softly. They stood there, caught in a space where truth and fear met halfway. Then, Juliet asked, so what now? Nathaniel looked toward the window. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. I'll go, He turned to leave, but just as he reached the door, Juliet spoke again. There's a coffee shop across the street. They make terrible scones but great cappuccinos. He paused, turned back. Hope flickered in his eyes. I'm not saying you deserve a second chance, she added, but maybe you deserve a first one with someone who doesn't already hate you. Nathaniel nodded once. I'll bring the cappuccinos, he said, and disappeared into the rain. Juliet exhaled, her body sinking back against the wall, heart pounding. What on earth was she doing? By the time Nathaniel returned, the drizzle had stopped and the sunlight was filtering through the clouds like shy hope peeking out after a long night. He held 2 paper cups in his hands, steam curling upward in the cold air. Juliet watched. From behind the counter, pretending to organize receipts she wasn't even reading. Her heart was restless, tapping a rhythm she didn't understand. He pushed the door open gently, the bell jingling again, a familiar sound that suddenly felt too loud. 1 cappuccino with cinnamon, he said, setting it down. 1 with chocolate powder, just in case you're more of a rebel than you look. Juliet took the cinnamon. You Googled me, didn't you? He smirked slightly. No, I just guessed. She arched a brow. Lucky guess. No, he said, sitting on the edge of a nearby chair. You're the kind of person who alphabetizes her fiction and has labels on her spice jars. She blinked. You noticed the spices? You left the pantry door open when you grabbed the towel. Juliet couldn't help the chuckle that escaped. Observant, occupational hazard, he murmured. They sipped in silence for a few moments. Outside, the street was coming to life again, cars, footsteps, the rustle of umbrellas folding. But inside the shop, the world felt paused, like it was holding its breath for whatever came next. I've been thinking, Nathaniel said suddenly. Juliet looked up. You mentioned the roof leaks, and the heater rattles, and half the lighting back there doesn't work. You noticed that too, huh? He nodded. What if I helped? Juliet frowned. Helped? How? He leaned forward. Let me invest in your store. She stared. I'm serious, he continued. Not a buyout, not a takeover, no strings, just a silent investment. Fix the roof, replace the wiring, maybe a little publicity. You'd triple your foot traffic. Juliet put her coffee down. Slowly. You want to give me money? I want to feel useful again, he said, voice quiet. I've got more guilt than I know what to do with and a bank account full of apologies no one wants to hear. But this shop, it felt like something real. She didn't respond. Nathaniel added, you can say no, I'd understand. But I'm asking. Juliet ran her hand through her hair, heart pounding for entirely new reasons now. She was no fool. Money changed things. Trust wasn't built in 48 hours. And a man like Nathaniel Cross didn't show up in a cozy bookstore offering capital without shadows following him. But when she looked into his eyes, she didn't see a man trying to manipulate. She saw a man trying to matter. Why the shop? She asked softly. Of all the places you could go. He smiled faintly. Because when I walked in last night, you looked at me like a human, not a headline. Silence again. Juliet stood, walked to the window, and watched the people crossing the street. Her heart warred with itself. Her head told her to send him away. Her gut whispered something else. She turned around. All right, she said. Nathaniel blinked. All right, you can help, she clarified. But not with your money. He tilted his head. I need shelves built, a wall painted, boxes sorted, lighting fixed. She shrugged. If you want to matter, roll up your sleeves. For the first time, his lips parted in genuine surprise and then curved into the warmest smile she'd seen yet. You drive a hard bargain, Juliet Hayes. She sipped her cappuccino and tried not to smile back. Someone has to. Juliet never imagined she'd spend her Saturday watching a billionaire balance on a rickety ladder in her bookstore, trying to replace a burnt-out light bulb while grumbling about cheap wiring. Yet here they were. You're going to fall, she warned, standing nearby with her arms crossed and a smirk on her lips. I used to scale ice cliffs in Patagonia, Nathaniel said, reaching upward. I think I can handle your rebellious ceiling light. The bulb flickered to life. He grinned triumphantly, then promptly smacked his head against the overhead beam on the way down. Juliet winced. Patagonia must have had better clearance. Nathaniel rubbed his temple, chuckling. Duly noted. The past few hours had passed like a dream if dreams came with sawdust, mismatched screws, and a surprising amount of shared laughter. She'd handed him tools and pointed at creaky shelves while he followed instructions without ego, sweat soaking the collar of his plain white tee-shirt. It was strange seeing him like this, unpolished, human, real. You ever worked retail? Juliet asked, leaning against the checkout counter as he started rearranging the children's corner. Nathaniel gave her a look. Not unless coding for 18 hours in a server room counts. She laughed. You're going to be sore tomorrow. He straightened a crooked shelf. I already am. Juliet walked over, crouched, and began sorting picture books by size. Their shoulders brushed. Thank you, she said quietly. For not making this weird. For just being here. Nathaniel didn't answer right away. Then he said, it's the first place I've been in a long time that didn't feel like a stage. She looked up at him. You were always on one? He nodded, eyes distant. In boardrooms, interviews, galas, even with family. Always wearing the right face, saying the right line, being the brand. Eventually, you forget who you were before the spotlight. Juliet's gaze softened. And now, I'm trying to find out if there's anything left of that person. A pause hung between them, thick with emotion. Then, instinctively, Juliet reached up and wiped a smudge of black paint from his cheek with her thumb. Their eyes locked. She realized too late how close they were, knees brushing, breath mingling. A flicker of something passed between them. Not just attraction, but something deeper. Something achingly fragile. Nathaniel swallowed hard. Juliet. Her name and his voice sounded like a question, a plea. But Juliet stepped back. I'll make us sandwiches, she said quickly, breaking the moment. There's some leftover. Turkey and avocado upstairs. Nathaniel nodded, watching her go, his jaw clenched not from anger, but restraint. When she was gone, he sank onto the nearest stool, exhaling a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. She was different from anyone he'd met in years, and that terrified him more than any headline ever had. Upstairs, Juliet stared at the open fridge door, her fingers resting on a jar of mustard. What was she doing? She barely knew him. He had secrets, a past that could detonate at any moment. And yet, he'd been kind, genuine, not just to her, but to her space, her dream. She couldn't ignore the way her heartbeat had stumbled when his eyes found hers, or how the walls she'd carefully built over the years were already showing cracks. Don't be stupid, she whispered to herself. Don't fall for the man just because he knows how to use a screwdriver and smile like sin. But deep down, a tiny, reckless voice whispered, what if it's real this time? Brooklyn shimmered under the soft amber glow of street lamps. The storm had washed the city clean, leaving puddles that mirrored neon signs and storefronts with fogged-up windows. It was the kind of night made for whispered confessions and quiet footsteps. Juliet pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders as she and Nathaniel walked side by side down Carroll Street. The air was crisp, the silence between them companionable. I don't normally do this, she said suddenly. Nathaniel glanced at her. Take midnight strolls with mysterious billionaires? She smiled. Or anyone, really, he chuckled, then looked straight ahead again. I don't either. Not since everything. They passed an old record store, its windows showcasing vintage albums and a dusty neon sign that blinked vinyl vibes. A mellow jazz tune leaked through the cracks in the door. Juliet paused. You like jazz? I used to, he said, peering in. My mother would play Coltrane in the mornings before meetings. Said it made the truth sound less harsh. Juliet's smile faltered. Do you talk to her often? She died 3 years ago, he replied softly. Cancer. Fast. Ruthless. Quiet. Just like her. I'm sorry. Nathaniel nodded. It's strange how the world moves on. One day you're somebody's son, and the next, you're just surviving. Juliet tucked that line into her heart. Just surviving. She knew that feeling well. They continued walking. What about you? He asked gently. You mentioned your heart had been broken. What happened? Juliet hesitated. The instinct to deflect rose like a tide. But something about the way he asked without pressure, without performance made her pause. He left a note, she said finally. No explanation. Just a plane ticket to Seattle and an apology scribbled in Sharpie. Said he needed space to grow. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Coward. I used to think so too, she admitted. But now I think he did me a favor. At least he left before the wedding. You were engaged? She nodded. For 6 weeks. It was all fast, romantic, wild, until it wasn't. Nathaniel glanced over, his gaze unreadable. You deserve better. So do you? They stopped at a small bridge overlooking the Gowanus Canal. The water below reflected the moonlight, rippling like a secret being kept. Juliet leaned against the railing, folding her arms. Nathaniel stood close but not too close, just enough that she could feel the warmth of him beside her. It's strange, she said softly, how people only see the shiny parts of someone. The articles, the curated smiles, the things money can buy, but not the pieces that crack when no one's looking. Nathaniel added. Juliet looked up at him. What cracked in you? He held her gaze for a moment longer than he probably meant to, then finally said, everything I built. Everything. I thought I was. It all came crashing down when I realized I didn't even know who I was building it for anymore. Silence. The kind of silence that settles into your bones. Juliet's voice was a whisper. And who are you now? I don't know yet, he replied honestly, but I think I'm starting to like the man who fixes shelves and drinks bad coffee in a bookstore more than the one who sat at marble conference tables pretending to have all the answers. She smiled faintly. That guy's not so bad. Nathaniel looked at her, then really looked, and for a second, Juliet's breath caught. The wind blew softly. A leaf danced across the pavement. He leaned forward just a little, and she didn't move. Their lips were inches apart when a dog barked from a passing brownstone, snapping them both out of the moment. Juliet stepped back, cheeks flushed. We should head back. Nathaniel nodded, exhaling slowly. Yeah, probably. But neither of them moved for a while, because something had shifted, not just between them, but within them. Back at the bookshop, the world had quieted again. Ezra purred softly, curled up on the windowsill, and the fireplace crackled in the background. Juliet poured chamomile into 2 mismatched mugs, while Nathaniel stood by the bookshelf, staring absently at a spine that read How We Heal. The words felt cruelly timely. She joined him by the fire, setting the mugs down between them. You okay? She asked softly. Nathaniel didn't answer right away. He reached for the tea, took a sip, and set it down again, as if preparing to pull something out of his chest and lay it bare. She left me on the day of the merger, he said suddenly. Juliet blinked. Camille, he nodded, eyes still locked on the fire. It wasn't the breakup that destroyed me. It was the timing. The headlines came out that morning. Accusations that I'd rigged the merger to sink her father's company. It wasn't true, but it didn't matter. By sunset, she had already moved out of our penthouse and issued a statement calling me irresponsible and emotionally unavailable. Juliet's breath caught. I lost half the board within a week, he continued. Investors pulled out. Lawsuits followed. My CFO resigned. My name became a punchline. He paused, swallowing hard. And the worst part, his voice cracked. I didn't even see it coming. I'd spent so long working, building, strategizing. I didn't notice that I'd built a life with someone who never saw me, only the headlines, the power, the illusion of control. Juliet stared at him, heart aching. You loved her? He nodded once. I thought I did, but now I think I loved the idea of being loved, of finally being chosen. Juliet looked away, his words brushing too close to her own scars. I know what that feels like, she murmured. Nathaniel turned to her. Do you? She nodded. When my fiancé left, I realized I'd built my life around him, his dreams, his pace, his future. And I never stopped to ask myself if I fit into any of it. Nathaniel studied her face. Maybe we're more alike than we thought. Maybe, she whispered. A long silence followed. No music, no noise, just the sound of two people breathing. In the aftermath of truth, then Nathaniel added, quieter. It took me months to step outside without feeling like everyone was watching me crash. Juliet gave him a long look. They're not watching anymore. I know, he said, but sometimes I still walk like I'm being followed. That line hit her hard. She reached out before she could second guess herself and gently touched his hand where it rested on the armrest. Her fingers brushed his softly, like a promise she wasn't ready to make, but wasn't ready to deny. His hand turned slightly, his fingers closing around hers. No kiss, no declarations, just warmth, trust, and two people holding on to the silence like it meant something, because it did. Rain tapped lightly against the windows of the bookshop. The sky had fallen into a soft gray hush, casting a silver glow through the windows. Ezra slept beside a stack of unsorted books, and the scent of lavender still lingered from Juliet's morning tea blend. Juliet sat on the floor behind the counter, legs tucked beneath her, sorting old journals and receipts, but her hands weren't moving. Her gaze had gone far, far away. Nathaniel stood at the door, watching her. Something was wrong. Juliet? He asked gently, stepping closer. She blinked, as if waking. Sorry, she said quickly. I'm just tired. Didn't sleep well? Nightmares? He asked, voice quiet. She nodded before she could stop herself. He sat across from her on the wooden floor. Tell me, she hesitated. Then finally, my mother was a librarian. She taught me how to read when I was 3. Our house was always filled with books and silence. She'd lost her voice box to cancer before I turned 10, so silence became our language. Nathaniel's expression softened. She passed away the same week I was supposed to defend my thesis, Juliet continued. I postponed. Everyone told me to grieve and then get back on track, but I couldn't. I spiraled. I isolated. I failed. Juliet looked down at her lap. That failure defined me for a long time. And then came Lucas the Fianc. He made me feel like I was finally functional again. Until he didn't. Until he said I was too quiet, too fragile, too hard to build a life with. Nathaniel didn't speak. He just sat with her in the silence her mother had once called home. After a long pause, Juliet reached into the drawer beneath the counter and pulled out a dusty, leather-bound journal. My mother's, she whispered. She opened it to a page where her mother had once scribbled in uneven, handwritten block letters. Grief is not a place we visit. It's the wind behind us as we walk. Always there. Sometimes gentle, sometimes wild, but always there. Nathaniel leaned forward, his fingers brushing the page beside hers. She was right. Juliet's eyes glistened. She hadn't cried in years, not in front of anyone, but the tears came now slow, quiet, as if asking permission. Nathaniel didn't rush her. He didn't offer cliches. He simply took her hand and held it. I don't want to be fixed, Juliet said after a moment. I just want to be seen. Nathaniel whispered. You are. Juliet didn't remember the last time she had laughed like this. She was barefoot in her tiny kitchen, apron stained with flour, eyes wide with mock horror as Nathaniel accidentally tipped an entire bowl of chocolate chips onto the counter and the floor. Oh my goodness, she gasped, holding in laughter. That was for the muffins. I thought we were making chocolate muffins, not chocolate chaos, Nathaniel said, grinning as he crouched down to gather the chips. You're terrible at this, she teased, dusting her hands on her apron. I warned you, he said, standing again. I don't bake, I consume. She flicked flour at him. He stood there, stunned, white dust on his dark sweater. Oh, it's worn now, he muttered playfully, grabbing a pinch of flour and tossing it lightly toward her shoulder. Juliet shrieked, laughing so hard she nearly slipped, clutching the countertop for balance. Ezra barked once from the hallway like a disapproving chaperone. In that small, sun-drenched kitchen, something beautiful had cracked open. Not the walls, not the silence, but Juliet, and Nathaniel felt it. She was brighter today, not fixed, but a little less burdened. They finally got the muffins into the oven after more mess and mischief than any recipe called for. As they waited, Juliet brewed tea, and Nathaniel found himself staring at her, hair loose, cheeks rosy from laughter, eyes lighter than they'd been in weeks. You're different today, he said softly. She paused, then smiled. Maybe. I remembered what it felt like to be happy for no reason. He nodded. I've missed that feeling too. They sat at her small wooden table, sipping tea, the scent of warm banana and chocolate wafting between them. Ezra curled up beneath their feet. Do you ever wonder what this is? She asked suddenly. He looked at her, serious now. What do you mean, this? She motioned between them. Us. This thing we keep pretending isn't real. Nathaniel didn't blink. I don't pretend. I just wait until you're ready to name it. Silence again, but not awkward, not afraid, just honest. I'm scared, Juliet admitted. I know, he said, but I'm not, and somehow that made all the difference. The muffins were gone. The tea had long cooled, and Ezra was gently snoring beside the fireplace when Nathaniel's phone buzzed for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. Juliet raised an eyebrow. You going to keep ignoring that? Nathaniel sighed and reached into his coat pocket. He read the screen and frowned. Lydia, where are you? Emergency board meeting. Wall Street Journal just broke the story. Call me now. He stared at the phone like it had betrayed him. Juliet leaned forward, her voice soft. What is it? They found out. he said finally. About everything. The cancelled merger, the internal audit, me stepping down quietly. The press twisted it. They think I'm hiding something. Juliet swallowed. Are you? No. Pause. But the truth isn't flashy enough for headlines. And my silence just makes it worse. He ran a hand through his hair. I have to go back. Juliet nodded, though her heart sank. I figured you would. I didn't want it to be now, he said, almost to himself. I wanted more time. Here, with you. The fire crackled. She stood and walked to the bookshelf, her back to him. You don't owe me explanations, Nathaniel. He stood too. Yes, I do. Because I want to come back. I want this. Whatever this is. You and me. Flower fights and bookstore mornings. Juliet turned. But your world is loud. Ruthless. You belong to places I don't understand. Nathaniel stepped closer. Then let me help you understand them. And maybe we create our own world in the middle of it all. She looked up at him. Are you asking me to wait? No, he said. I'm asking if you'll come with me. Double quotes silence. It was the kind of moment you couldn't rehearse, only feel. The kind that split a story open and wrote a new chapter. Before anyone agreed to it, Juliet's heart raced. Every instinct said no, to stay where it was safe, where heartbreak couldn't find her. But his eyes held no lies, only risk and truth. I don't know, she whispered. I can live with that, Nathaniel replied. As long as it's not a no. He pulled her gently into a hug. And this time, she didn't pull away. The bookstore felt bigger now. Or maybe it was just emptier. Juliet stood by the window, sipping her morning coffee, eyes flicking to the corner booth where Nathaniel used to sit. His scarf was still there, forgotten or maybe left on purpose. She hadn't texted him. He hadn't called. It had only been 4 days. It felt like 40. Ezra sat curled near the register, tail swishing like he knew something she didn't. Customers came and went. Mrs. Lanning for her Tuesday mysteries, a teenager looking for used poetry books, a man buying the exact brand of tea Nathaniel used to drink. Juliet rang them up, smiled, chatted, but her thoughts always drifted back to the flower fight, the thunderstorm kiss, the impossible question. Will you come with me? She hadn't said yes. She hadn't said no, but his absence lingered like an unfinished sentence. That evening, as the sky turned lavender behind the town's rooftops, Juliet pulled out her old journal, the one she used to write in before. Everything went blurry with grief. She dusted it off and opened to a blank page, and she began to write, not about Nathaniel, not about the bookstore, but about herself, where she had been. New York City pulsed with its usual urgency, but Nathaniel felt none of it. He sat in the back of his car, watching skyscrapers slide by like indifferent giants. His calendar was full: meetings, investor calls, public appearances, but his mind remained fixed on a small corner bookstore with fogged windows and a girl who never tried to impress him. Juliet Hayes. Even her name had become an ache. You haven't touched your food, sir, his driver Cameron said gently as they drove to an evening fundraiser. I'm not hungry, Nathaniel replied, loosening his tie. Cameron hesitated. If I may, sir. Sometimes when something's bothering you, you don't need to fix it. Just stop running from it. Nathaniel blinked. Cameron had never spoken like that before, but he didn't respond. Because what could he say? That he'd left behind the only woman who made him laugh at himself. That every time he opened a boardroom door, he hoped to find her sitting on the table, swinging her legs like she owned the sky. That the power, the suits, the empire, none of it felt real when she wasn't around. Meanwhile, in Havenbrook, Juliet was shelving books when a customer walked in. A tall woman with sharp cheekbones and a Hermes bag. Excuse me, she said in a clipped tone. I'm looking for a first edition Fitzgerald. Nathaniel. Thorne said this bookstore might have rare treasures. Juliet froze. The woman arched a brow. He said the owner had impeccable taste. It took Juliet a second to find her voice. We do have some Fitzgeralds in the back. Let me check. As she pulled the ladder toward the archive shelves, her fingers trembled. He was still talking about her, mentioning her, remembering her. In the middle of his world, when she handed the book to the woman, their fingers brushed. You're Juliet, aren't you? The woman asked softly. Yes, she whispered. The woman smiled, not cold, but kind. You changed something in him. I don't know what you did, but thank you. She paid double the book's price and walked out, leaving Juliet with a racing heart and questions she didn't know how to hold. That night, Juliet stood outside the bookstore, staring at the street lamp where she once said goodbye to him. She closed her eyes and whispered to the wind, maybe we weren't finished after all. And at the very same hour, across the city skyline, Nathaniel stared at a digital photo on his desk. It was of the two of them taken by accident. Blurry and bright, flower in their hair. He smiled faintly. I need to go back. Juliet tried to focus on work, but everything felt off. The bookstore smelled of coffee and ink like always. Her teacup steamed softly on the counter. Birds chirped outside, and the old bell above the door occasionally jangled. But it all felt like a lullaby being played too slowly, because ever since that mysterious customer mentioned Nathaniel, Juliet's chest had become a quiet storm. She hadn't checked the news in days. She didn't want to see his face on magazine covers or whispered about on gossip sites. That man, the CEO, the mogul, the billionaire, wasn't the one who made her laugh with flour on his nose. But late that afternoon, she got a call. Juliet Hayes? The voice asked. Yes. This is Margaret from the Havenbrook Historical Society. We just got an anonymous donation for the full restoration of the town's library. It's under your name. Juliet blinked. What? There's a note attached. For the girl who taught me what books can't. Juliet's knees gave way, and she sat on the floor, breathless. Nathaniel. 3 hours later, she stood outside the bookstore after closing, staring across the streetlight. The answer was hiding in the trees. Then a soft engine purred nearby. A sleek, dark sedan pulled up. Not flashy, just elegant. The door opened. He stepped out. Nathaniel. He looked taller than she remembered. Or maybe just heavier with longing. His coat fluttered in the wind, but his eyes, those familiar, haunted eyes, stayed locked on hers. Neither moved until she broke the silence. You donated to the library? He nodded. You once said stories deserve better homes. Juliet folded her arms. So do people. Nathaniel stepped closer. I didn't come here to fix what I broke. I came to ask if you'd let me try. Her lip trembled. What makes you think I'm still waiting? I don't. His voice cracked. But I've been waiting for you. Silence stretched, not awkward, but electric. Then she took a step forward. Another. Until they stood face to face. You hurt me, she whispered. I know. You walked away. I was scared, he said. You made me want a life I didn't think I was allowed to have. Juliet searched his face. The man who had everything, and yet had come back, asking for only one thing. Her. So she whispered the truth she hadn't even told herself until now. I never stopped loving you. And with that, he pulled her into a gentle embrace. Not rushed, not hungry, but like someone holding the missing piece of his soul. The town was quiet, the wind still. But inside to hearts, the story had just restarted. The next morning in Havenbrook felt unusually alive. Word had already begun to ripple. Nathaniel Thornhill was back. It wasn't in the newspapers. It wasn't online. It was something far stronger than headlines. It was whispered in the bakery. Shared over cafe tables. And everywhere Juliet went that day, eyes followed her with wonder, curiosity, and in some corners, envy. She opened her bookstore as always, her hands trembling as she arranged the morning displays. But before she could set out the new arrivals sign, Nathaniel walked in, holding 2 cups of coffee. Juliet arched a brow. Trying to charm your way back in with caffeine? I studied your patterns, he said with a gentle smile. Almond milk, to sugars, and a dash of cinnamon. She sipped. Perfect. You remembered, she murmured. I forgot everything else, Juliet, but never you. Their shared silence was heavy with history, until the door burst open again. It was Claire, Juliet's longtime friend and the town's unofficial broadcaster of all things dramatic. Jules, she gasped, nearly dropping her purse. Why is he here? Juliet sighed. Claire, not now. Nathaniel straightened. I understand I may have disrupted things. You disappeared from her life like a ghost, Claire snapped. Do you think you can just waltz back in? Claire? Juliet cut in softly but firmly. It's not your battle. Claire stared. Her lips quivered. But then she turned, muttering under her breath as she left the shop. Juliet looked up at Nathaniel. I suppose not everyone missed you. I didn't come to be liked. His eyes searched hers. I came for you. Juliet blinked. Back emotion. It's not that simple. I don't expect it to be. She folded her arms. What about your world? Your empire? Your board members? They'll adjust, he said simply. Because for the first time in years, I know what I want. Juliet hesitated, heart pounding. The past had returned, but it came with choices. Could love rebuild what fear once shattered? And more importantly, was she ready to believe in something fragile and beautiful again? Outside, the wind swept across the street like a page turning. Inside, two hearts stood on the edge of a chapter that could rewrite everything. That evening, Juliet couldn't sleep. Nathaniel's presence had unraveled something deep within her, a tightly bound ribbon of longing, questions, and fear. She lay on the couch wrapped in a patchwork blanket, moonlight stretching across the floor like silver ink. Her tea had gone cold. Her thoughts hadn't. She finally stood, restless, and climbed the creaky stairs up to the attic, a space she hadn't visited in months. Dust floated in beams of light as she pushed open a forgotten trunk near the window. Inside were pieces of her life, old journals, childhood photos, and a sealed envelope marked in Nathaniel's handwriting. Her breath caught. It was dated 3 years ago. With trembling fingers, she opened it. Jules, if you're reading this, I'm either too much of a coward to say this face to face, or you found what I hid hoping one day you'd forgive me. I left because I was afraid. Afraid of how deeply I loved you. Afraid that loving you meant letting go of everything I thought made me powerful. But you made me question my empire, my rules. And I panicked. I was wrong. And if I've lost you forever, know this. You were the only real thing in a life full of noise. Forgive me if you can. Or just remember me if you can't. Juliet wiped away tears with the sleeve of her sweater. The pain, the confusion, the broken trust, all of it was still real. But this was real too, and raw, and full of regret. She closed the letter slowly, letting it rest against her chest. Downstairs, the wind howled like a memory. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. Nathaniel, meet me at the lighthouse. Midnight. Juliet stared at the screen. Her heart thudded in her chest. The lighthouse where he first told her he was falling in love. It was where promises had once bloomed. And now, where truth waited. The lighthouse stood alone at the edge of the cliffs, just as it always had, a sentinel against time and tide. Juliet stepped out of her car into the crisp night air, heart pounding like a war drum in her chest. The moon bathed the scene in silver. Waves crashed far below, rhythmic and unbothered, while wind teased the hem of her coat. She saw him before he saw her. Nathaniel stood by the railing, his back to her, his silhouette tall and still. He hadn't changed, not really. Even under the weight of guilt, success, and time, there was something unshaken in the way he stood. Juliet, he said softly, not turning around. She froze. I didn't hear you call, she whispered. He finally turned. There were storms in his eyes, but also light, the same quiet light he used to look at her with when she laughed mid-sentence or danced barefoot in the kitchen. I've stood in boardrooms, Grace. I've argued with prime ministers, but standing here now, I'm terrified, he confessed. Juliet stepped closer, clutching the letter in her coat pocket. Why did you really leave? Nathaniel swallowed. Because I didn't think I deserved to love someone like you. I was too used to closing doors before they could hurt me. And now? She asked, her voice cracking. I'm ready to leave every boardroom behind if it means having a chance to build something real with you. Silence stretched tender, tentative. Juliet stared at him, the wind pulling strands of her hair into her face. You broke me, she whispered. You disappeared, Nate, and I had to stitch myself back together, without knowing why. I know, he said, stepping closer. And I will spend every moment proving that I'm not that man anymore, not if you'll let me. A single tear traced down her cheek. She looked up into the night sky, as if the stars might guide her. I don't know if I can trust you again, she said honestly. Then let me earn it, he said. Not with grand gestures or billion-dollar shows. Just let me start with this. He held out a key. To the beach house, he said. I've kept it for 3 years. I never went back, because it wasn't a home without you. Juliet stared at the key. 1,000 words danced in the space between them. Then quietly, she took it. I'm not saying yes, she said, voice barely audible. But I'm not saying no either. Nathaniel exhaled, the kind of breath you release when you've been holding it for years. In the distance, the lighthouse beacon swept across the sea, casting light on the dark waves. Tonight wasn't a conclusion. It was a beginning. The next morning, soft sunlight streamed through Juliet's bedroom window. She sat on her unmade bed, holding the small silver key Nathaniel had given her the night before. It felt heavier than metal. It carried memories, choices, wounds. Beside her, Nora stirred a cup of tea. So, Nora said, watching her carefully, did you forgive him? Juliet gave a soft, rueful smile. Not yet, but I think I started to listen. Nora nodded. That's all a heart needs, sometimes a little quiet to hear what's true. Juliet looked out the window. The town of Billionaire slowly waking below. Her fingers curled around the key. I'm not ready to dive in, but maybe. I'm ready to walk into the shallow end. Later that day, Nathaniel returned to the beach house. It was quiet, dust motes dancing in sunlight, furniture covered with white cloths. He walked to the living room window, the same spot where he'd once watched Juliet paint in the garden. He placed a new vase on the windowsill. In it, a single daffodil, Hope. That evening, Juliet stood at the edge of Billionaire Pier with her sketchpad, something she hadn't touched in months. Waves lapped gently beneath the wooden planks as she started sketching again. Not a person, not a lighthouse. She drew the key, and in the corner of the page, in delicate pencil, she wrote, "Maybe is enough for now." Across town, Nathaniel sat alone on the beach house steps. He didn't check his phone, didn't write a speech. He just waited, and somewhere between the setting sun and the rising moon, a soft set of footsteps approached. Juliet. No suitcase, no words, just her. She sat beside him, and for a long time, they said nothing. But in that silence, everything changed, because love doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it just stays. Juliet didn't speak for a while. Her fingers brushed the edge of her sketchbook, still tucked beneath her arm as she sat beside Nathaniel on the porch steps of the beach house. The ocean whispered in soft tides, and stars blinked quietly. Above them, Nathaniel finally turned to her, voice low and cautious. I wasn't sure you'd come. Juliet looked out at the sea. Neither was I, he nodded, accepting her words without protest. I would have waited anyway. She glanced at him, then not as the man who broke her heart, or the billionaire whose empire stretched across the skyline, but as the man who had waited, alone, with nothing but hope and memory. I hated you, she said, not to hurt him, but because it was true. Not just for what you did to me, but for how easy it was for you to walk away. I didn't walk away, he replied quietly. I crumbled, and I didn't know how to build anything after that without you. She exhaled deeply. I thought I had to become stronger on my own, but the truth is, even strength feels empty when there's no one to share it with. A beat passed, then she whispered, "Did you ever stop loving me?" His eyes glistened in the moonlight. I tried, God, I tried. But love like this, it doesn't leave. It just hides under guilt, fear, and stupid pride. He reached into his coat pocket and gently unfolded a note, old, crease-worn, from being opened again and again. Juliet took it. She recognized her own handwriting. The love I have for you is both a wildfire and a lighthouse. It burns, but it also saves me. Tears welled in her eyes. I never meant for it to hurt this long, he said. But I want to make it right, not with flowers or apologies or fancy gestures. I want to earn your trust again. Slowly, truly, day by day. Juliet closed her eyes and breathed in the salt and sand and silence. Then, she held out her hand. No speeches, no promises, just a touch, an invitation. He took it gently, their fingers interlacing like puzzle pieces, finally remembering where they belonged. And in that quiet, sacred moment, neither of them knew what tomorrow held. But tonight, they found something they had both lost: home. The days that followed were quiet, not the kind of quiet that suffocated, but the kind that whispered of peace. The calm after a storm that had lasted far too long. Juliet stayed, not because of words Nathaniel had spoken, but because of the way he didn't try to fix her. He let her feel, let her breathe, let her be. For the first time, he didn't chase her love, he held space for it to return on its own. They took walks by the shore in the mornings, where she would collect seashells and he would talk softly about nothing important. She sketched again, not for galleries, but for herself. Nathaniel never asked to see them. He just waited, patient and content, like a man rebuilding trust one sunrise at a time. One afternoon, she found him in the kitchen, flour on his cheek, trying to follow her grandmother's old scone recipe from memory. I think I added salt instead of sugar, he said with a guilty grin. Juliet laughed, not just a polite chuckle, but a real, heart-deep laugh that made her chest ache. With unfamiliar joy, they sat by the fireplace that night, the failed scones between them, and she asked, "Why now?" He didn't hesitate. "Because I realized love doesn't mean never messing up. It means choosing the same person every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Her walls were still there, but softer now, translucent, no longer built of anger, but of caution. She reached into her sketchpad and handed him a page, a pencil drawing two hands, fingertips brushing, hesitant but hopeful. Beneath it, she had written, "Let's learn each other again." Slowly, Nathaniel looked at her. "You mean that?" "I want to," she said, "if you're willing to meet me where I am." He kissed her palm, not her lips, a gesture of patience, of reverence. "I'll meet you anywhere." And just like that, a new chapter of them began, not as lovers, pretending nothing had happened, but as two people brave enough to start again, and wise enough to know that love isn't the absence of mistakes, it's the presence of grace. A week after their quiet reconciliation, Juliet found an envelope. It wasn't hidden, just quietly resting inside the old writing desk in the study, the same place Nathaniel often sat to gather his thoughts. It was sealed, her name handwritten. In his familiar bold strokes, she hesitated. Curiosity tugged at her fingers, but something deeper held her back. She wasn't sure if she was ready for what it might say. When she finally opened it that night, Nathaniel was asleep beside her, one arm slung loosely across her waist, his breath even and steady. She unfolded the letter slowly. "My Juliet, I wrote this on the day you left, not because I expected you to find it, but because if I didn't let the words out, I would drown in them. I don't know how to be angry at you. I only know how to miss you. I know I failed you, over and over, in ways that don't show up in arguments or slam doors. I failed to see your heart breaking beneath your smile. I let my success become my mask, my excuse, my shield. But I remember the girl who kissed me outside her art school in the rain. I remember the way you looked at me, like I was your world, long before I became the world to anyone else. You gave me your love when I had nothing but hope. And I wonder every night, was my love too late or too loud? Was I fighting for you the way you needed, or just the way I knew how? If you never come back, know this: I loved you fiercely. I still do, even in your silence, even in your absence. You were never replaceable. You were never wrong to leave. If you do return, I hope we can begin again, not from where we fell but from where we first believed. Forever yours." And Juliet pressed the letter to her chest, tears streaking her cheeks. She hadn't known he'd written this, hadn't realized how much of his hurt he had buried beneath quiet patience and hope. It wasn't just a love letter, it was an apology, a vow, a letting go. That morning, as the sun spilled golden through the windows, Juliet placed the letter on the kitchen counter, beside a warm mug of coffee, and whispered, "Let's finish what you started." Nathaniel turned, brows furrowed. Then he saw the envelope. She walked into his arms, no drama, no declarations, just the steady hum of something real being rebuilt. And in that small sacred moment, they finally understood. Sometimes love isn't loud. Sometimes it's a letter never meant to be sent, and a heart brave enough to open it. Spring crept into their world with tender insistence. Shy blossoms on the magnolia tree, the scent of rain-washed earth, and the sound of wind chimes gently clinking on the porch. Juliet found herself painting again. Not for an exhibition, not for approval, just for the joy of it. The canvas became her confidant. She painted the shifting light on Nathaniel's face in the morning. She painted the shadows of leaves dancing on the walls. She painted feelings she couldn't put into words: peace, remorse, hope. Nathaniel noticed the change, not just in her, but in himself. He no longer rushed through his days. He turned down meetings, ignored emails on Sundays, and sat with her in silence. When words felt too heavy, they learned to be present, not perfect. One evening, Juliet found Nathaniel in the backyard, barefoot, digging a small hole beneath the oak tree. "What are you doing?" she asked, amused. He looked up, sheepish. "Planting roots." He held up a tiny tree sapling, a fig, her favorite. "You once told me your grandmother had a fig tree outside her kitchen window," he said. "Said it smelled like childhood and safety." Juliet's throat tightened. He remembered. He planted it gently, and together, they pressed their hands into the dirt, anchoring the past into the earth, watching it transform into something alive. That night, as they sipped tea on the porch, Nathaniel reached for her hand. "Do you think we're getting it right this time?" he asked. She smiled, eyes glimmering under the starlight. "I think we're finally learning to give love wings without pulling up its roots." Juliet stood at the window of the art studio, watching the rain streak the glass like soft hairs. The fig tree Nathaniel planted swayed in the wind, still young, still fragile. Like them, A knock at the front door pulled her from her thoughts. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened the door, the last person she expected to see stood there, umbrella dripping, his eyes haunted by years he hadn't been part of. Damien, her ex-fiancé, the man who'd once promised her the world and left her to pick up its broken pieces. Juliet, he said, his voice gravelly. I know I'm the last person you want to see, but please, I need to talk to you. She didn't say a word. Her fingers clutched the doorknob like it might keep her heart from falling out of her chest. I made the worst mistake of my life walking away, he continued, but I'm here to make things right if you'll let me. Juliet's silence stretched like a wire between them. Finally, she stepped aside. 5 minutes. He walked in, and with him, years of buried emotions, unanswered questions, and an ache she thought she had painted over with new colors. Nathaniel arrived half an hour later. He heard the low voices from the hallway, the sound of Juliet's quiet laugh, and then the sharp silence that followed it. He turned the corner and froze. Damien. Juliet turned at the sound of Nathaniel's footsteps, her eyes instantly flicking to his. Uncertain, searching. The room grew dense with unsaid things. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Everything okay? Juliet opened her mouth, then closed it. Damien, bold as ever, extended a hand. Nathaniel King, the billionaire in love with the girl I let slip away. Nathaniel didn't take his hand. I don't believe we need an introduction, he said coldly, but thank you for the reminder. Damien smirked, then turned to Juliet. I'll be in town for a few days. I hope we can talk again. Really talk. And then he was gone. That night, the silence between Juliet and Nathaniel wasn't comfortable. It was cautious. I didn't know he was coming, she whispered. I believe you. But, she asked gently, but I also know how it feels when someone walks back in and tries to rewrite the ending, he said. Just don't forget who stayed. Juliet moved closer, her hands resting on his chest. I remember everything, especially who helped me believe again. The rain didn't stop. Juliet sat alone in the studio, staring at the unfinished canvas she had started days ago, 2 silhouettes standing under different skies, a space of stars between them. Nathaniel hadn't stayed the night, not because he was angry, but because he was hurt, and that hurt lingered louder than any argument. That morning, Juliet found a letter slipped under her door. From Damien. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had stayed? If I had fought for you the way I should have? Let me show you. I'm not the same man who walked away. She folded the note carefully, then threw it in the fireplace. Some chapters weren't meant to be reopened, but her heart still thudded. In confusion, not because she loved Damien, but because he reminded her of the girl she used to be. Before trust was shattered, before she knew how fragile it could be. Later that day, Juliet made her way to Nathaniel's apartment. She didn't knock. She used the spare key he had given her long ago, the key he said opened more than just a door. He was in the kitchen, silent, brooding, the soft hum of a jazz vinyl filling the room like the pause before a confession. I didn't ask for him to come, Juliet said softly. I know. I didn't expect you to leave last night. He looked up, and in his eyes she saw not anger, but fear. I just needed space, Nathaniel said. Not from you, from the thought of losing you. Juliet walked up to him, placed his hand on her chest. Do you feel that? My heart's still here. It's still yours. He pulled her into a tight embrace, as if afraid she might vanish like a dream in morning light. I don't want to compete with your past, he whispered. You don't have to, she replied, because you are my present, and the only future I want. That evening, she painted again. But this time, the 2 silhouettes stood under the same sky, hands clasped, stardust between them, no longer distance, but connection, love rewritten, together. The studio was quiet, save for the rhythm of raindrops tapping against the windows. Juliet stood barefoot on the wooden floor. Her canvas completed a masterpiece born not only from colors, but from clarity. She had spent the morning painting, and in painting memories. No more running, no more wondering. What if? Just truth. A soft knock on the door. Nathaniel entered, holding a small paper bag and a thermos. Lunch, he said, lifting the bag. And coffee. The good kind. Juliet smiled. The one with too much cinnamon? He smirked. Just the way you like it. They sat together by the large studio window, sharing sandwiches and warm coffee. There was no need for grand declarations today. The air between them had shifted not back to what it once was, but forward into something steadier. After lunch, they strolled down to the harbor. The rain had lightened, and the clouds parted just enough to let slivers of light shimmer on the water. They passed the spot where Juliet had once painted alone, afraid of her own voice. Nathaniel squeezed her hand gently. I want to ask you something, he said, stopping near the old boat ramp. Juliet tilted her head. I want to rebuild something, not just for me, for us, our gallery, together, not just featuring your work or mine, but the story of how we found home in each other. Tears stung her eyes, not because she was sad, but because the dream she once buried was rising again, and this time, someone was helping her carry it. Yes, she whispered. Yes. That night, she wrote a short letter. No envelope, no return address. Damien, I forgive you, but I no longer carry your ghost. I've returned home to myself. Juliet. She placed it in the ocean tide the next morning, a quiet release. The silence had spoken, and it said, you are allowed to be whole again. 2 years later, Charleston, South Carolina. The sun slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the gallery, casting golden hues across the polished oak floors. Children's laughter echoed from the community arts corner, where tiny hands dipped brushes into vibrant paint. The place was alive, not with wealth or prestige, but with meaning. Nathaniel stood near the entrance, hands in the pockets of his tailored linen pants, watching Aurora from across the room. She was kneeling beside a little girl with Down syndrome, gently guiding her hand along the canvas. She still wore her heart like an open book, honest, tender, and unapologetically human. 2 years had not dulled that light. If anything, it burned brighter. The gallery, now named the Aurora Project, had become more than just an art space. It was a sanctuary for wounded artists, for struggling children, for survivors, for stories. Nathaniel had funded the renovation but insisted Aurora lead the vision. It's your heart that built this, he'd said. They now lived in a restored colonial-style home just a short walk away. Its walls were lined with Aurora's paintings and candid photos of their travels: Ghana, Prague, Kyoto, Cape Town. But the heart of their world was this space, the gallery, that healed more than it showcased. A soft touch on Nathaniel's back brought him out of thought. You always get this look when you watch her, Elise said, smiling, her own daughter tugging at her hand. Like you're still trying to believe it's real. He chuckled. I am, every day. Elise had grown too, remarried to a gentle journalist who adored her, and at peace with the past. Time, it turned out, didn't just heal, it redeemed. Aurora approached, wiping paint from her fingers with a towel, her hair pulled into a loose braid, still stealing glances. Mr. Montgomery? Always, Nathaniel said, pulling her close. You're the best painting in this gallery. She rolled her eyes but blushed anyway. Come on, there's someone I want you to meet. She led him to a young boy, lanky, maybe 16, nervously clutching a sketch pad. His eyes were wide, unsure. This is Caleb. He's new, just got out of foster care. Nathaniel knelt beside him. You like to draw? Caleb nodded. A little. I'm not that good. Aurora smiled knowingly. Neither was I once. That's why you keep going. Nathaniel extended his hand. We're glad you're here. Caleb stared at the hand, then took it, and just like that, another thread wove itself into the tapestry they'd been stitching all along, a life not of perfection, but of purpose. That night, as twilight settled over Charleston and the gallery doors closed, Nathaniel and Aurora sat on their porch swing, barefoot, sipping mint tea. He reached into his pocket, a small box. She blinked. Nathaniel, he smiled, pressing it into her hand. No pressure, no rush, but when you're ready, I'd like to spend every season with you forever. Tears filled her eyes, but her voice was steady. I already do. She opened the box. Inside wasn't a diamond. It was a small ring carved from brushed gold, etched with the first line of a poem she once painted. Out of brokenness came bloom, and in that moment, no vows, no ceremony, no witnesses. Just two souls under the stars. They knew they were already home.